background to why Kathleen and I and Shravani are here tonight is that this year is the 150th anniversary of the birth of Swami Vivekananda, who was a disciple of Sri Ramakrishna in India. He was a Bengali intellectual, and he became converted to Sri Ramakrishna's way, and by one thing or another wound up at the Annisquam Village Church. In 1893, it was his first U.S. public appearance. And so this I've always thought of Annisquam as a place of convergence, and this is one of those sort of incredible convergences that happened right here in this village. The celebration will take place at our church on July 28th at 4:30. And so this is a preview. And I thought it would be interesting for the history group to hear about the background to this, what happened, how Annisquam and the East sort of met in this interesting way. And the organizations that are going to be sponsoring the celebration are the Annisquam Village Church, the Boston Vedanta Society, and the Providence Vedanta Society. And we know Shravani from the Providence Vedanta Society that Kathleen and I visited in June to meet with them. So I'd just like to give you a little background. And I'd like to ask you to imagine that you are in this area in the 1890s. And that you may have read Emerson or Thoreau. You may have caught what you didn't know at the time were glimpses of the Eastern pattern of thought in their writings. In her book, A New Religious America, which I highly recommend, is by Professor Diana Eck, who's at Harvard, and is the result of something that she did called the Pluralism Project. But in her book, she says, if we imagine ourselves in New England in the 1890s, when Hindu thought had been shifting the mental and spiritual furniture of Boston's intellectuals for more than 50 years, we may be astonished to realize that few, if any, New Englanders had ever met what we now call a Hindu face to face. So the mainly unattributed currents of what Eck calls the Easting of old New England, which flowed through the thought of Emerson and Thoreau in the first half of the 19th century, was really a result of close study of sacred texts by Emerson and also Thoreau and others, the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads. But it was not the result of an actual encounter with a Hindu teacher or Swami. So while the ideas were not entirely strange by the 1890s, when ideas arrived in the flesh, you can imagine it caused a stir. So when Vivekananda appeared in Boston after arriving in Chicago a month early for the World Parliament of Religions, which is why he came to the United States, he traveled by steamer from Calcutta to Vancouver, and then took a train from Vancouver to Chicago and found out he was a month early. And he ran out of money. He ran out of money. I guess he didn't have a Timex. He ran out of money, and as luck or fate would have it, he met a woman on the train from Vancouver to Chicago whose name was Kate Sanborn. And this is where our story moves to Massachusetts. Kate Sanborn was a professor at Smith College. She taught literature, and she invited Swami Vivekananda to come to her home to sort of while away the month before returning to Chicago. And while he was in Boston, she was a Bostonian, and while he was with her, he met that whole circle of the Boston and Cambridge intellectuals of the late 19th century. So he must have, going back to viewing the man as opposed to the ideas, he must have been attracted, some mixture of, he's very exotic, so there must have been some attraction to that. But at the same time, there might have been a barrier, repulsion. This was a very white part of the world, and to have a man, even as handsome a man as Swami Vivekananda, walk into a room, it might have still caused some consternation. But on the other hand, there was also this very romantic impulse that existed at the time. And so it must have been an interesting balance. And much like today, some saw India is pagan, polytheistic, and idolatrous in the light of their own American Protestant experience. And others, again like today, reached out for India as a sort of mecca for universal and sublime religious inspiration, seeking to fill an empty space in their religious lives. So Vivekananda, as a representative of this either pagan or sublime, depending on your point of view, a nearly mythological place called India, very few people had been there, was a handsome, exotic, poised young man of 30, and in the language of psychology, my bet is that the transferences and projections that were directed his way must have run the entire gamut of human response, physical, mental, and emotional. So Vivekananda traveled by, as I shipped from Calcutta to Vancouver, and when he met Kate Sanborn, she introduced him to a man called John Henry Wright, who is a professor of Greek at Harvard, and who summered here on Arlington Street in a sort of boarding house. And Wright said, well, you must come to Annisquam and speak at the Annisquam Village Church. And so he did. And it was Swami's first public lecture in the U.S. Right down the street. Amazing. Now, Swami Vivekananda was not, didn't come with a PhD and, the normal set of credentials one expected to be able to speak at something like the World Parliament of Religions, which was really less worldly than it sounded. In terms of diversity. But Professor Wright cleared the way for him to be able to speak there. And there's a great story that Swamiji at the Providence Vedanta Society told me. That he said it in Chicago, well, he has no credentials. How can he possibly speak? He doesn't have the book learning. And Wright said to them, does the sun need credentials to shine? And they admitted that, in fact, they didn't. And Wright compared him to the sun in terms of the illumination that he was bringing to the Western world, especially the United States here. And so when he got to speak at the World Parliament of Religions, he was an instant, unqualified success. After his first words, "Sisters and Brothers of America," there was an immediate standing ovation. Women fell all over each other to get a closer look at this handsome Hindu monk with these beautiful ochre robes and a turban, who spoke flawless English in a deep, authoritative voice. So perhaps it was the spirit of universalism that was renewed and blowing through the country at the time. But his call for a universal religion which would have no place for persecution or intolerance in its polity, and would recognize the divinity in every man and every woman, and whose scope, whose whole force would be centered in aiding humanity to realize its divine nature, was met with unqualified enthusiasm. So, this idea of an immanent God, a God that was close, a God that was within, appealed to many who came from a Judeo-Christian heritage, and I use that term very loosely because it's not necessarily an accurate term, but this Judeo-Christian idea of an external God, a God who is somehow out there and entirely other, and not close, and certainly not inside, this really appealed to people. And his ideas on yoga and meditation as part of the practice of understanding that immanent God were very exciting and new. So he compared the variety of religious traditions to a prism, saying it is the same light coming through different colors. But in the heart of everything, the same truth reigns. He called for tolerance and the end of religious fanaticism, which by a strange coincidence, the date of his speech was September 11th, 1893. He became hugely in demand and people flocked to his lectures all over the country. He spent a lot of time in California as well. And he was a breath of fresh air in the American religious and intellectual scene. And interestingly enough, he saw many, many things here in the United States that he wished to translate into the Indian context, especially in terms of support, government support networks for the poor. He saw equality, or more equality, not exactly all equality, but more equality here than the caste system in India would have allowed, and he hated the caste system. He preached the necessity of social support so absent in his country, and he especially admired the intellectual attainments of American women and the use they made of their freedom, because he came from a country where that was simply not the case. And so I'm going to end there, and I'm going to let Kathleen continue. Are there any questions at this point?
Thank you. That was wonderful. I've been wanting something to happen between our societies, our religions, for a long time, because when I first came here, I did meet some of the pilgrims to our church, which is how I met Sravani a few years ago. But anyway, in 1993, a possible collection of our mutual religions had been partially planned, and it was going to take place in the village church, but we just didn't have enough room for all the people who were coming from the Vedanta societies all over the country. And so it ended up being in Boston, and we missed that opportunity to be together. And thereafter, each summer, numerous Vedantins, their swamis, and so on, have visited our church and spent some time honoring the space. And I have been lucky enough to be there when they have come. And often we just sit for a while, or we make some music. I think 2 years ago we had a Swami from France, and he brought a couple of musicians from France, and so I implored them to make some music, and then it ended up being Amazing Grace. It was one of the best versions of it I've ever heard. by this wonderful singer. Maybe she can come again sometime. The other thing that particularly interested me about our connection with Swami Vivekananda is that he resided for a while at the Hyatt Mayer House, then the Hyatt House, with Alpheus Hyatt and his family. And at that time, there was a schooner there by the name of Arethusa. And the Arethusa would go out on biological experiments with Alpheus Hyatt and his students. He was a teacher at MIT. And later on, that became the beginning of Woods Hole. I'm sure you all know that. But anyway, the idea that Anna Hyatt, the sculptor, was 17 and probably there when Swami Vivekananda stayed there has just always thrilled me for some reason. I just think it must have been very interesting for both of them. That is one of the pilgrimage spots for people who come to visit, to walk in Vivekananda's steps. They come to the church, they come to Arlington Street, and they come to visit the Hyatt residence, where there's a beautiful, probably more than 100-year-old apple tree that he may have sat under. So there are just little things like that that seem to connect us. I often wonder what Vivekananda's voice sounded like when he said brothers and sisters of America, that made everybody jump up and give him a 2-minute ovation. He must have had an incredible voice. I think the thing that so attracts me to the story and all is that it still is a holy place to Sravani and to many people, and sometimes less so to us, but we should recover that. And so that's why I'm so interested in having this occasion. We're kind of sorry that it's the day after Sea Fair. Make note of that. So just make some space for it if you can, because I think it will be really worth coming to experience. We don't quite know what it will be like, but from our connections over the years, I would say it's going to be wonderful, and I hope you'll come. And Sravani has brought some pictures. She's made a wonderful film about Vivekananda, about his journey here in the United States, and that will be shown as well that day. So do come.
Good evening, friends. I'm almost feeling like Vivekananda right now, you know, an unknown Indian standing in Annisquam with all the scholars and historians and intellectuals. I can't tell you how happy I am, and it's not just because of the fact that, you know, we are going to have this program and stuff, but every time I come to Annisquam, and it's always a great privilege, a lot of joy to be here. And I think Reverend Deirdre has very nicely introduced you to Vivekananda and his connection to Annisquam, and Kathleen has said a few words about the connection. So I have been in the Boston area for over a decade now, last 10 years, and since I came, because of my association with the Vedanta Society, I kept hearing about Annisquam. Okay, this is the place to be. But you know, it was only last year that for the first time I visited Annisquam, and and when I came to the church, the village church, I looked at the guest book and I was amazed to see all the names from people I know from all over the world who have come here to the village church. Their signatures. Some of them are historians who came here, stayed for several weeks to write history about Vivekananda's stay in Annisquam, the exact details and so forth. Some were monks who are of the Ramakrishna order, which Vivekananda had established in 1798, and then there were others like admirers and followers like me whose life has got touched and changed by coming in touch with the message of Swami Vivekananda. So that's the connection, and so as I see it, this connection has developed over several decades. The Vedanta societies came in existence in the early 20th century, in 1930s. Since then, they have been coming here, and I'm so happy that this year, which also happens to be the 150th birth anniversary of Swami Vivekananda, which is being celebrated all over the world by people who value him and his message, and the Vedanta societies in New England, Boston, and Providence is coming together with Annisquam Village Church. We are very grateful to Annisquam Village Church for hosting this ceremony, and we all look forward to that, and we hope that you all will come for that. So what I'm going to say a few words about what really brings us together, and this is Swami Vivekananda. The more we look into Swami Vivekananda, and that is what has happened to for everyone all over the world, is that as you look at this person, the person really fades out. He is someone who was born in 1863, like in the 19th century, which is not that far way back, but we can still include in the modern age, so to speak. But there's a touch of mythology around him. There's a touch of drama. There's which really draws our minds and interests us. So I will tell you a little bit about Swami Vivekananda, in addition to what Reverend Deirdre has already introduced you. So it's slightly from a different angle. So he was born in India, and in 1863, and as a young student he was exposed to the Western and Eastern philosophy, science, all the thought currents. He was a prodigy really as a child. So even when in his college, he knew pretty much everything about Tyndall, Tennyson, Berkeley, all the thought currents that was in the West he knew, and he was also familiar, of course, with the Ramayana and Mahabharata, the different epics of the Eastern epic, and then he was always looking to see that the conflict, or the differences and the similarities. So and he was also a seeker of religion. So he was really very eager to see what is the goal of life. People say about God, but who is God? Have anybody seen God? So he used to go to different religious people and say, have you seen God? And that was at a time when India was ruled by the British for almost more than 100 years. And that was the time when the intellectuals in India were greatly influenced. The educated society of India was greatly influenced by Western thoughts, and that was a time when they had started to forget the Oriental culture, religion, and blindly mimic whatever the form of Western culture and religion that was seen in India. So that was the time. So Vivekananda also got very much interested in the Western thoughts, and he was actually a rebel sometimes, and he used to challenge the Indian thoughts. And that is when he came in contact with Sri Ramakrishna, who was a mystic. And once he came in touch of him, he was just a teenager. And then at the age of 23, when Sri Ramakrishna passed away, Sri Ramakrishna was Swami Vivekananda's spiritual teacher. After he passed away, he became a monk. And as a monk, he traveled all over India, Himalayas and the west, east, and he actually traveled throughout India, and he came in, he actually as a, in his 25 or 23-year-old, he actually came to see the India as such. I mean, not just the educated, highly educated, the elites, but the common people. And that's when he used to, see that a country which is under the sovereignty of the Western, the British rule, how can we elevate the condition and so forth. So that's when he was really unknown even in India. Nobody knew him. He was a young boy, a young monk. And that's when a few scholars who actually spoke to him say that India will not recognize you, Swami. You please go to America. And America in those days was, it was the late 19th century. America in those days was like Reverend Deirdre said about Emerson, Thoreau, that transcendental revelation was there. And then there was also science and technology. I think there was the great scientist. I mean, America became a society that was leading the whole world in terms of scientific thinking, innovation, inventions, and so forth. So the Indians actually, very few Indians recognized Vivekananda at that time and say that, Swami, you have to go to America. There is this Parliament of Religions. Please go, and only they will value you because of their open-mindedness and so forth. So he came to America, and there is a long story, of course. And then in the Parliament of Religion, of course, he did not have the credentials and so forth.
Open-minded.
Well, that is the organizers. And then but again he came across a very open-minded person called Kate Sanborn. And friends, a documentary, I was very honored to produce a documentary which will be available during the July 28th, which actually presents Vivekananda, all these things in a film, actually brings all these stories together in a film, and it will be available as a DVD. So so when he came to Parliament of Religion refused to accept him or even let him speak. So, and again he was only 30 years old, unknown, a monk who does not earn money, who has taken the oath of chastity and poverty. And then what would he do now? So he remembered the kind-hearted Kate Sanborn, who was a professor at Smith College and also a socialite and a very hospitable person. It says that she even the president, Woodrow Wilson, has also come to her farmhouse and stayed there. So she was an extremely hospitable person. So Swami Vivekananda came to her farmhouse, and she welcomed him with wholehearted, welcomed with very warmly welcomed, and also seeing actually felt his condition and started introducing him to all the people who would value him, and also to the cultures and customs of America, which was unknown to a 30-year-old person, a monk from India. So that's where a very important thing comes, that New England, the Boston area, was really in America the first area, or first, in terms of persons, who has accepted and honored Swami Vivekananda, recognized him. And more importantly, so when Kate Sanborn was, whomever she was introducing Vivekananda to, everybody was very impressed by the genius of his, by the genius of his, he was very fluent in English. He was, he knew very thoroughly what is there in the Bible and what is there about what the philosophers are saying, the scientific thoughts, everything he knew. So there was no difficulty in connecting with him as a person, although if you think culturally there's a huge divide, but as a person, when you it was very easy to connect with him, and everybody was touched by his genius. And the news soon spread that someone like such a person is here, and John Henry Wright, the Reverend Ray also referred to, a very acclaimed professor of Greek in Harvard. He was actually here in Annisquam during his summer. During the summer, he had a summer home here. And then he invited him to come and stay. And when Swami Vivekananda came here, many other scholars were also staying in Annisquam during summer. And soon the news spread, and of course his gorgeous turban and his dress and everything, the news spread that a very magnificent person is here. And they all gathered in 8 Arlington Street, and for long hours they would just listen to what he has to say about religion, about the culture of India, and also his thoughts and about the Upanishads and so forth. And they used to listen. And then Professor Wright, of course, organized that the lecture. Now, why is it so important that he gave the first public lecture? After all, what makes it so important? So the importance comes, actually, I have here. So this is the Parliament of Religion for which he came, and then Swami comes to Annisquam. I'm staying. So what can we do about that? Maybe I can stand here. Yeah. So this is Professor Wright, who is here, and then this is 8 Arlington Street, right? Yes. And and there is Vivekananda. So these are actually stills from the film that has been produced on him. So yeah, it's a very nice film. I'm sure you all will like it. It has much more details and very nicely presented, which probably I'm not doing that much justice right now. So yes, so this is Swami Vivekananda in Annisquam. And this is him in the Annisquam Village Church. Alright, so yes, we'll be showing all that.
Except that window was not there at the time.
Oh, is it?
No.
Okay.
So you can tell it was Superman.
Okay.
No,
Alright, so we have to give, nobody took the picture of Swami Vivekananda in Annisquam Church at this time, so we have to give, some freedom to our imagination. Alright, so what next? Yeah, so this is what I actually wanted to show. So what happened, actually, it seems magical, although our rational thinking does not quite fit in our regular rational thinking, that this person comes to America and he speaks his first lecture, but something very special happens here. So he gives his lecture, and then he was not at all interested to go back to the Parliament of Religions in Chicago just because of his experience there, because he was not welcome there. His funds were very less at the time. He was funded by the different students and scholars in India, and whatever funds they had given him, those were dwindling, and due to the want of money and so forth, he was actually thinking about going back to India, basically, that there's no but Professor Wright took the initiative, and he said, do not worry about anything, I'll make arrangements for your funds. And about credentials, he wrote to the Parliament of Religion organizers that he is more learned than all the learned professors of America put together. So that's how he introduced Swami Vivekananda. But these were certain things that happened here in Annisquam, and then Swamiji actually went to, so we reverentially and lovingly address him as Swamiji. So Swamiji went back to, went and appeared in the stage of Parliament of Religion, and he became an instant he was accepted. His words, his message was so universal, and it touched the heart of every single person there, and they were all very eager to. He became a hit, so to say, in that context of in Chicago Parliament of Religion in 1893. So what happened after that was he was invited all over America. So in those days, all over. Well, there are certain states which are white, but then
Still kind of looks like that.
but look at the East Coast, okay? He was all over there, and then of course in the Midwest also, in California, everywhere. So it was a period of over a decade. He actually died just after reaching 40, so he died very young. So he came here at 30, and within 10 years he did all this massive work. And I have a picture later, I think. Let's see if it is right. Yeah, so look at this. So basically, all the lectures that he gave, the picture is the resolution is not that high, but they came as 9 volumes. I mean, all the lectures that he gave in America. After America, he started. He went to London. He was invited there, and in London also the same thing happened. There was a section of people who were just ready to get his message, and then Europe. He traveled around Europe, and then. What I find most interesting is after his success, after his acceptance and success in West, that young boy who left India completely unknown and unheard of, goes back to India, and he receives that warm welcome, okay, the recognition that, okay, so this is Swami Vivekananda. So that is a huge thing, the contribution of America and UNESCO, for that matter, in this great phenomena, I would say. And then he went back to India and established the Ramakrishna order, whose motto is for self-realization and also for the good of the world. So that was a period in which the religious, the spiritual seekers like the monastics who'd leave family ties and everything, they would feel that to realize God, we have to go to the recluses of the forest and caves and sit there and meditate and realize God. But he actually started a new current of thought that no, for the first time he organized monks. He established the Ramakrishna mission. The Ramakrishna order is an organization of monks who are also monks and monastics and very disciplined way they are approaching their spiritual seekers, but at the same time they are very close to the common people, and their main goal is by serving everyone realize God. That is, service to man is service to God. So that is the ideal that Swami Vivekananda actually for the first time awakened the whole of India, which was not aware of that. They thought, okay, God is in exclusion. If you have to realize God, it is an exclusion of the world. But that was something. So in this context, I would like to say a few words about what I feel, what appeals to me as the core of the teachings of Swami Vivekananda. Like I said in the beginning, that as we read about Swami Vivekananda, as we know more about Swami Vivekananda, the person slowly blurs. The personal aspect slowly blurs. Actually, that is very attractive, like very nicely Reverend Deirdre has presented, the very attractive thing about the person, his age and this and that. That was what really attracted people. But the more you know him, the person blurs and his principles become prominent. Actually, then you actually come face to face with principle. Vivekananda vanishes from being a person to becoming a principle. And to me, I'm a student of his teachings. So to me, what it seems is that he, for the first, he integrated scientific thinking with our emotional faculty, the brain and the heart, the development of brain and the heart, in the sense that, like a scientific approach to religion, a scientific approach to everything that we do in life. So when we say scientific, what does it mean? A systematic, rational thinking about the integration of scientific inquiry into everything that we do, and even religion, even spirituality is not an exclusion of a science, and how in a scientific methodical way we can his book Raja Yoga very nicely describes it. But he actually he synthesized the various so-called yogas or the methods of spiritual evolution, the spiritual practices, and showed that how scientific we can be about religion. And once we are scientific, our emotions do not come in the way. The emotions are in our control, and that is when we can truly talk about religious harmony. Harmony of thoughts, the barriers of culture, color, and the barriers of geographical barriers, those dwindles, those fades away, and the true universalism we can really feel, we really start to experience in our lives, and life really becomes blissful. We talk about interfaith and so forth. So that whole interfaith revolution that we see now today in the religious system is actually, I would say, is a manifestation of that. We are accepting other religious paths also. So how, if we give, if you say, okay, my faith is right and everything else is wrong, that actually from there when we look very rationally, we see that every path is leading to the same goal. So that is one aspect, and he takes it further and shows how we can apply philosophy in our daily lives. How these truths that they are not just for our intellectual understanding, how we can actualize those in our lives, and how they can really influence our, how we can become those thoughts. From just being from an intellectual inquiry, how it becomes, how to apply them and make our lives, successful. So these are the two main aspects of his teachings that comes to my mind right now. And with that, I think it's time to conclude. So I will open it up for questions. I'm very happy to meet the Historical Society, and I think I heard from Kathleen and Reverend Deirdre, and I'm actually also, I was very eager to know more about the Historical Society. I was more eager to know more about Annisquam's history and so forth. So I hope you can also tell me something about your what it is all about, and I also have some questions, but for now you can ask. I think all three of us will take questions.
So I have a question. So this Parliament of Religion that was held in Chicago, Parliament's an English term.
Right.
So who was the instigator, or who were the instigators of this particular Congress?
So in 1893, the World's actually what there used to be this World's Fair that happened in London a few years back, and it was Chicago's turn, just like we have World Olympics this time, which happens these days, which happens every 4 years in different countries. So this World's Fair happened in London, and it was turn for America to show their might, and then they organized the World's Fair. It was also commemorating the 400th anniversary of Columbus's discovery of America. So that's where the main. It was also called, the World's Fair was also called Columbian Exposition.
Mm-hmm.
So so in that Columbian Exposition, for the first time, the name of the person is, I think, R.W. Barrows. I don't remember his name part, but it's Mr. Barrows. He was one of the main organizers who thought that let us now, why he used the parliament, I beg your pardon, I do not know why he chose the word parliament, but that was what it was called. The purpose of the parliament was bring together in conference the representatives of all religions from all over the world. So if there is any other term used, I'm not sure, but that was the term which was used.
What did he die of so young?
Yeah, that is that is a very interesting question. Is so I think it's overwork, I would say. Because if you see the amount of work he had done, I mean in America in this, and he was actually when he went back to India also, he was traveling like he established the Ramakrishna order. He himself did not hold any post there, official post. He made his brother disciples, you know, the president of the order and so forth. But he was invited everywhere. He was an inspiration. I mean, again, I think a better word, that principle, and an inspiration. So he had to travel, he had to establish centers all over the world. And again, like I said, although we are in the modern times and it's only 19th century, not far, 19th, the confluence of 19th and 20th century we are talking about. It's not like, like BC or anything like that. So everything is modern, scientific, and yet there is a mythology around this person. So Sri Ramakrishna, his master, said that he had a vision that Swami Vivekananda was a star in the sky, and who had nothing to, a star as a symbol of a sage who is, God realized soul. Now this is mythology, and I beg your patience on that. It sounds very mystic, so I won't say mythology, but it is a little, there's an aura of mysticism around it. So he had the vision. So when he comes, so it was by some providential, arrangement that he decided to take birth on earth and then save humanity. So that was the vision his master had. And then although he was his spiritual master, he used to treat Swami Vivekananda as God, actually, as a very prominent manifestation of God in human form. So he used to say others that, see, he did not tell this to Swami Vivekananda, this story, this vision. He told it to others. And he said that the day he will come to know, his actually pre-monastic name is Naren, so the day Naren will come to know about his true nature, he will give up the body. He will not stay in this, he will give up the body. So a few years before he actually passed away, someone asked that Swami Vivekananda, do you know who you are? He said, yes, I know. So, and then they thought, okay, he's going to give up his body. So that is, of course, the mystical side of it. But yes, his health broke down just due to the tremendous amount of work he did. And I think reading these books, reading his life, actually volumes have been written. And as I said at the beginning of my talk, that in Anasquam, not just the admirers of Vivekananda we come here to honor Vivekananda. So I'm also an admirer. We come here to honor his presence here. We come here to honor Anasquam. We come here to honor Anasquam Village Church, which is a very, a sacred place for us. We come here to honor the people of Anasquam who had recognized this very special manifestation, and who had really helped us. I mean, me being an Indian, I would say that I owe it to Anasquam, because I basically who helped Indians to recognize Swami Vivekananda. So yes. So just to conclude her, so it was really, he had to do a lot of work, and volumes have been written on him. So reading his life, his movements, we know that it is not possible for a normal human being to do what he has done. Yes, please.
Were his thoughts fully evolved when he came to the United States, or did the United States have some sort of an impact on how his beliefs evolved from when he was here?
My understanding of it is belief-wise, or I would say Sri Ramakrishna or true Vedanta says religion is not a matter of belief. It is about realization. just I realized that right now I'm standing in Anasquam and talking to all of you. Similarly, I am divine. That is my experience. That I'm not this limited body. I'm not limited by my physical limitations, but I'm divine. So that is an experience, that is a realization. And Swami Vivekananda had that realization before he came to America. So that is recorded, and he had this realization, but he needed a platform to teach, to manifest that realization, so that others can also, to distribute his own realization, his own thoughts to others. And from that point of view, yes, America provided Swami Vivekananda that platform, if the lack of a better word, I'm using that word, but as a place, a forum in which he could manifest and express. So the expressions, yes, he was very happy to be here, because everybody was receptive and open-minded enough to receive what he was saying. So America helped him to express who he was and what his realization.
Did the Swami develop many followers when he was here, American followers, and did he lead groups of people to actually learn how to self-realize their own divinity?
Yes, sir. He did. He did actually. So again, let me go back to the. Oh, something happening. Yeah. So. After Parliament of Religion, actually one aspect of Vivekananda, I must say that he was very human. He had a very palpable human aspect. So many people here could actually develop relationships with him, like brother, like sister and son. He was so young, so basically most of the women around was like his mother. So basically, so that's how it was. So that's how it started. But as days went, and as he traveled and gave lectures, yes, they were ardent followers of his thoughts. He did not want a cult. He was establishing a cult was not his mission. His mission, he himself said that just like Buddha had a message for the East, I have a message for the West. So he really brought the Oriental thought current, the spiritual thought current to the West. And those who were ready, and the number is quite is not small. So those who were ready for that, they accepted him. So there was a group of people who accepted him as their friend, as their their son, their brother, and so forth. And there was a group of people who were his ardent students, and some became nuns, monks, and joined the Ramakrishna order. Yes.
Where was he from in India? What was his education like?
Okay, very good question actually. He was from Kolkata, so again going back to the... Yeah, Kolkata is somewhere here in the eastern side, and Kolkata is also a place that leads the is the intellectual and cultural capital of India. So that is where he was born. And his education, he was educated in St. Xavier's College, and English. Those days missionary schools and colleges were very common in India. So he was educated. So he was from very young age he was exposed to Western-based education, and in his family he also exposed to Indian education. So he was exposed to both, and he was very, very thorough with all the the schools of philosophies and all the like Darwin, Muller, everyone. He knew. He could quote pages from that. He was actually a living encyclopedia. Yes, so that's yes.
Can I ask, what was the British relationship to Ramakrishna?
British relationship. I mean, what kind of relationship the British had with
Right.
Ramakrishna.
How they dealt with Ramakrishna and thought of
Okay.
Ramakrishna.
Okay, so again, from what I know, I can tell you. So basically, Ramakrishna did not have any direct. He was a very simple person. He used to live in a temple outside of Kolkata, and he could not even speak in English. He could just barely say a few words in English, and a very simple life he used to lead. Now, in that sense, he did not have any connection with the Britishers who were, like this. But still, we see him mention something about the British, the governors and the administrators that he used to vaguely come to know about. He, so to speak, did not have any direct interaction, but the professors and those who actually valued spirituality and religion and history and so forth, so basically those missionary colleges were taught by missionaries and like professors from Britain and so forth. So they knew about Sri Ramakrishna and they greatly valued. Actually, Swami Vivekananda was recommended to Sri Ramakrishna by a British professor. Yes.
Wow.
Were his parents like educated people also, and that's how he went to missionary schools and colleges?
Yes, he was from a very affluent family. Yes, so his mother, those days Indians, women would not go to college or school or anything, but she was very much, she could read and she could, she was more with Indian culture and religion and epics and all those she gave to him. His dad was a lawyer by profession and very affluent, so that's why he's.
Were the missionary colleges that he went to Hindu missionaries?
No, they're Christian.
Christian, that's what I
Yes.
wondered, yeah.
Yes, and I might want to mention that was that time kind of a thought revolution was happening in Kolkata particularly, and that was called the Brahmo movement. Like it said that the Westerners, the Western influence was very prominent on the intellectual community of India, particularly Kolkata, and they used to accept that more like an imitation, I would say, a little superfluous, because this, they were thinking that, oh, our India is so backward, why go with this, ideology and, polytheism and so forth, these are not. So the Brahmos did not believe in God, idolatry, basically, God in a form, God is an image. They used to think that God is formless. So no form and all. So that was the thing that the Brahmos used to think. And Swami Vivekananda was a Brahmo actually. He accepted that because he was also influenced by the Western thought a lot. He also thought that India, this Indian thinking of idolatry and everything is wrong. And then he himself says that it is such an irony that I did not believe in idols, but then I had to learn everything about religion sitting at the feet of somebody who got everything in spiritual life by worshipping idol, and that is Sri Ramakrishna, his master. Something happened, but I think we are done.
It's finished.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.